Hello and welcome back to the Shepherd's Crook podcast. Hope you guys are having a great morning this morning, or if it's afternoon in your neck of the woods right now when you're listening, I hope your afternoon's going well. Couple announcements real quick, and then I get to introduce you to a good buddy of mine. Really looking forward to this conversation, but want to remind you the Sons and Slaves podcast. I'm talking rites of passage. I'm talking about raising sons into men, and I've got two of my boys that are co-hosts with me. We got a third son on the way that'll be here in November, and then here in about, 4 or 5 years, he might start. His voice might be popping up on that podcast. So you guys want to check that out. Would love for you to go over there to iTunes and search or whatever podcast platform that you use. What we're trying to do is put out a weekly podcast. And right now we're going through a book by Bob Schultz called Boyhood and Beyond. And we're just getting our talking points chapter by chapter through this book. And we're having a lot of fun in the process. And so I am interviewing fathers, talking to other young men that are in this process of becoming a man, and we're just having a blast. I mean, my sons. So if you want to check that out, please do. Let's go ahead and introduce who I'm talking to today, and then we'll pray, and then we've got a lot of fun things to talk about. So I am talking to my good buddy, J.R. Burdick today. J.R., how's it going, man?
Hey, it's going well, Jared. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Well, let's go ahead and pray, and then we will talk all things cow farming, dairy farming, life, and ministry, and who knows where it'll go. So let's pray. Father, we just thank you for this time. I thank you for JR. I thank you for just technology that can allow this conversation to happen. And God, we want to use it for your glory, for your honor. And we pray that everyone that listens would be encouraged and challenged. God, I pray that our faith would be stretched. I pray that that we would be encouraged to do what you've called us to do in the manner you've called us to do it. Pray you'd help us to work hard and just take all these talking points and apply them. And I trust you're going to help us. And I thank you for my friend and brother and their family and all you're doing in and through them. And I just trust this is going to be a good conversation. We thank you and praise you. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. JR, why don't you go ahead and introduce everybody and just tell us a little bit about yourself and your family and then what it is that you guys do.
Sure. Well, like you said, my name's J.R. Burdick. I live in north central Missouri. We're dairy farmers, and we're going to get into just kind of where we're at right now and some things that have changed on our farm as we go forward. But my wife and I have been married for 29 years, will be 30 years next summer. And she's a farm girl from North Iowa. And we have 4 kids. They are all out of school now. My oldest son is 28, and then I have a Jeffrey. He's a diesel mechanic, and he works for a large farm machinery company, troubleshooting and doing stuff like that. My second oldest son is Jared, and he lives out in Kansas. He's a welder. He's married to Grace, and they have 2 little girls, Mabel and Olive. And then we have Caitlin, our daughter, who is married to Mick. They have 1 son, little Bruce. He's my Brucey Bear. He's 5 months old now. He's just a bundle of joy. And then my youngest son is Jordan, and he helps me on the farm. We're trying to get him started in the farming, but he's also studying to be he's an apprentice electrician right now. So we go to a small little 1689 Baptist church in the next large town over from us. We help with music there. For a while, I was leading men's ministry, but then life kind of got in my way and had to step away from that a little bit. We're really involved in the abolition of abortion here in Missouri, and just enjoy the life that God's given us, and continue to be amazed that he uses us, and that we still have so much to learn.
It's awesome. A lot of good things. Now, you raised your children in a home that was, if I remember right, because I was talking to you and your wife, it was a Mennonite house. Is that right? That was moved a couple miles to where your farm is today. Yes. What was that story?
This house that we live in was part of a farm that was donated to the University of Missouri. The house was built in I don't have the exact, I think it was 1886 was when the house was built, and it was built by Colonel Corbett was his name. Everybody called him Colonel Corbett. He was a colonel in the Confederate Army, and So we
Awesome.
we live in this, yeah. So it's like we moved into it, and God's put us on a journey. And at first, I was like, I can't believe we're living in a Confederate house, and now I'm like, I can't believe I'm living in a Confederate's house, you know. So
Well, I was reading this book. We got actually a couple books from, we just went to St. Louis with our pastors and wives. We went to a used bookstore and we picked up a couple books there, and um, one was on General Lee, and it was like a Meet General Lee book from the 50s. And this was read in public schools in the North and the South, apparently. And I was reading through it, and it actually had a breakdown of the North and the South, and Kentucky and Missouri were not actually listed as for the South. So I guess they were neutral states. Is that what that was?
yeah, that was part of the Missouri Compromise, and that was why you had, you know, the Jayhawks in Kansas were, and the Missouri
Okay.
rebels were fighting so much, was because Kansas was a true Republican or northern state, and Missouri was like conflicted, you
Okay.
know. So that was a lot of you know, really neat history, and kind of shows, you know, standing, you know, when you try to straddle the fence, all you get
Hmm.
is a sore crotch, and that
Yeah.
was kind of where Missouri ended up.
I like that. I've never heard, that's a farmer colloquialism right there from
Yes,
Missouri. I
yeah,
like that.
it goes a little different than that, but we'll leave it that way.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so one other question. I know we might talk a little bit more about this on the back end, but since we're already talking about it, so you said Jordan is, it's funny you got a Jared and a Jordan, but
Mhm.
Jordan is already an apprentice electrician. How old did you say Jordan is?
He's 20, and
Okay.
he started working for this local small electrical company while he was still in high school. He's days run together now, years run together, but I think he was either 16 or 17.
Hmm.
And so he was still in high school. We were still, you know, teaching him here at home, but we, a couple days a week, he would go and start learning, you know, just being around it, you know. So start learning wire gauges, start calling, you know, what's a TA, what's an FA, what's PVC, what's rigid pipe. He started to learn all that stuff, and you know, he just kind of developed a fondness for it, and so he's well on his way at 20 to being a journey, having enough hours for his journeyman's electrician
Hmm.
card.
Man,
So
that's awesome. Very
yep.
cool. I mean, this is something that, I mean, before we were recording, we just mentioned this, but to encourage our children in that direction, in that path.
Mhm.
I go to campus here at SIU once a week, and we're out there just doing one-on-one evangelism and all this. And I can't help but think about every one of these students that are going to be coming out of school, and thinking about what their student loan debt is going to be as they're walking out of school, and thinking about what their degree is going to be. And
Mhm.
then this opportunity we have of homeschooling our children, they can start at 15 years old at the local, and get a certificate at the local college, get a certificate, and within a couple of years start an apprenticeship at 17 years old, to
Mhm.
be an electrician or something like that, and start making 20 something dollars an hour, have
Mhm.
benefits, have a pension going, and everything like that as a 17, 18-year old.
Mhm.
And how great of an opportunity that is. I just love what your kids are doing, and it's
Mhm.
just a really cool thing. Now, the homeschooling has been in your blood. I mean, you did this. You said you were homeschooled when you were growing up, and you were homeschooled when it was at a cost to your parents. I mean, it was, I don't know if it was illegal then, maybe it was, but
Was, yep.
okay. So explain that. Why were they committed to that? And then you're somebody who didn't revolt against that. You wanted to do that for your children and your family as well. And so
Mhm.
props to your parents to making that call back when it really cost them.
Mhm. Well, we had uh, always been in Christian schools and private schools. Um, the 80s farm crisis came along, and it was really tough financially. And my mom was a teacher in our church's Christian school. So she was an English teacher. She taught, at that time, she was teaching a combined class of fourth, fifth, and sixth graders, you know, the traditional Abeka type school curriculum. And things were just getting tight, you know. And so I was in seventh grade. So I had been in school up till seventh grade. And one of my good buddies there, who was another farm kid, he didn't go to our church, but his parents sent their kids to our church, and we had he was my best friend all through high school.
Mm-hmm.
And Joe got into a little trouble, and he got kicked out of school, you know, being
Uh-oh.
in a Christian school. And so his mom and dad started homeschooling. And I just thought that was, at first I thought, man, that's weird. What's Joe doing?
Right.
And then I'd go over and visit with Joe, sleepovers and stuff, you did when you were a kid. And he's like doing all the schoolwork in the morning, and then he gets to help dad all afternoon farming.
Like,
And
man,
I
this is
was like,
cool.
man, that's awesome. So actually, I came to my mom and dad that summer, summer of 1984, and I said, Mom and Dad, Joe's being homeschooled. Why can't I be homeschooled? I could help dad more. I could do this. And I actually went to my dad and brought that forward to him. And he was
Hmm.
kind of like, whatever, I know some things that are going on, but dad's always been very politically aware and stuff. And then it was about 2 weeks, and we were having breakfast one morning after morning chores, milked all the cows, fed all the cattle, and we just had this family discussion about this. So it was me and my sister and my mom and dad, and my mom, because she's a school teacher, and she's like, and my mom, wonderful lady, she's gone. I'll look forward to seeing her in heaven soon, or at some point in time,
Hmm.
hopefully not soon.
Right.
But but uh, she was just like, no, we aren't. I'm a
Can't do
school
that.
teacher. Yeah, that's for the weirdos. And I started praying about it. And I'm be honest, I started praying about it. My dad started praying about it. We didn't know each of us was praying about it. And about 3 weeks later, my mom came. She goes, I just feel like we should do this.
That's awesome.
And so, that's like in June, and that fall we start. And my mom and dad are like, okay, the we lived in Michigan at the time. So there's a long story. We aren't going to get into that day how I ended up in Missouri, but Michigan was very hostile to homeschooling. They had just arrested the DeYoung family. That dad was in jail, and my mom was like, "We're going to do this. We're going to end up in jail," because we were pretty well known, in the community and stuff.
Hmm.
And so we started homeschooling. So from 7:30 in the morning, we hurried up and got chores done, and I got in the house, and we didn't go anywhere. You didn't go to a doctor's office. You didn't go grocery shopping.
Hmm.
Mom had an errand to run. Mom ran the errand. So from 7:30 to 3:30, we stayed in the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
Nobody knew what we were doing. And I can remember my dad coming, and my sister's 2 years younger than me, and he said, if we call it child protective services now. If they come to the door, I'm going to be at the door. And he told me where to run and where to hide and what barn.
Man, that's wild.
I mean, and that's not an exaggeration. That's exactly what was going on there. And my mom and dad got very involved in Michigan homeschooling and the legal battles there.
Hmm.
Dave Coleman and Alan Cropsey were the two attorneys that represented the DeYoung family. And I can remember them being in our home and sitting down and strategizing about how to fight the battle and win. And finally, in Michigan, I think it was 1988, we won the right to homeschool.
Man, that's
And
awesome.
so I saw all that battles, and that makes me kind of, as I look at homeschooling today, I kind of go, people do not understand what people sacrificed.
Hmm.
Everybody just thinks it's normal.
Yeah,
But
man.
I was truly concerned about my parents going to jail, but they stood for it. And we had people in our church, pulled out Romans 13. You guys it's unbiblical. They wanted to take my dad and put him up for church discipline
Oh
because
my
he was
gosh.
his kids. So yeah, dad happened to be on the chairman of the deacon board at the time, so it didn't get real.
Didn't get too far. I tell
That
you what, in
was,
the local Baptist church, that chairman of the deacon board, he's got power.
yeah. So that was so. My wife now, she grew up in a public school environment. She went to a Christian school up until the 6th grade, and then again the 80s farm economy. The
Hmm.
parents couldn't afford it anymore, so she finished out her education in the local public school, and she just hated it. And
Hmm.
so we get married. And in fact, before we got married, before we got engaged, I told my wife, I said, we're going to homeschool our kids.
Hmm.
Said, so if you're okay with that, we'll keep dating and moving forward. But if not, now's a good time to not be doing this. And,
Love it.
yeah. So we just have always felt a strong calling to homeschool our kids, and
Yeah.
enjoyed that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, let's transition a little bit and let's talk about the steps of faith that really you've had to take over this last year. And I'd love to hear about the farming and your life as a dairy farmer, and then the difficulty of government tentacles getting down into everything, and the subsidies that really brought you to almost like a crisis point and kind of put you in conflict with other farmers as well, and ended up leading you to decisions that you guys have made to transition and into a different kind of work, still within the farming industry, but doing your own sales now as well. So I'd love to hear that. And then also I'd like to hear about, after you made this decision, the whole tornado thing happens and just annihilates your property. And it seems like, through sometimes when we make big decisions, we kind of think, okay, God is going to immediately bless this. We're expressing faith in this, and then everything's going to fall in line, and then it's going to be really seamless, and we're going to see God work and everything. And you guys made this decision, trust of the Lord, and then this tornado happens. So it kind of bring us back to before you guys were doing the traditional dairy farming, and then now you've made this transition, and bring us through that whole process.
Sure. Well, we've always been a very been very skeptical of subsidies and government's tentacles that are in agriculture.
And for those that don't know, could you just explain how that, just the basics of how that works?
Sure. Okay, the basics. We could talk for days about this, but I'll say this. Okay, government involvement in agriculture has gone back really since the Civil War. Abe Lincoln, he was the first president who appointed and made the cabinet position of Secretary of Agriculture. And it was based on this idea of, we got to teach farmers how to be better farmers. Okay. So at first, everything that happens, government stepped in and took the role of fatherhood, took the role of mentorship, took the role of priest, and said, we're going to be your educators now for agriculture. So it started out that way. And then it moved towards, we're going to start to influence what you grow by, and how you grow it by, that carrot. It was always the carrot of a little bit of money. We're going to do this. We're going to provide this. After World War II, it just exploded. And so there became more and more programs that you could sign up for. USDA grew larger and larger, and you started reporting your crops, and you started. So when I started farming, the USDA office, FSA, we call them now, Farm Service Agency, was kind of just this. They were there, but they weren't overbearing. 1985, the first farm bill that came across the president's desk, President Ronald Reagan, had a lot of conservation. They called it conservation titles, and there was they called the swamp buster and the sod buster, and that was when they first really said, okay, you can't do something with this land, you can do something with that land. CRP came out of that. All hunters love CRP because, hey, we got all these acres now that just got native grass growing on them, and we can see the deer, we can see the pheasant, and again, it was government's influence, putting their thumb on the scale, so to speak. Moving forward to now, 1985 was also the first dairy herd buyout, where we had too much. They had in the 70s, they had subsidized the production of milk so much that we were storing milk in caves in Kansas City, Missouri, and down around Springfield, and billions and billions of pounds. The government would buy it, stick it there, and that's where.
So that's that government cheese thing that Ian was talking about.
Government cheese. Yep, that's where the government cheese came from, and that was all because government got in there and said, "Oh, you poor dairy farmers, you're getting screwed over here. So we're going to make up for your loss over here." Well, then we flooded the market, and we just exacerbated a problem that the market would have taken care of in a couple of years, and instead, it has it just perpetuated itself. When I started farming in 1992, or 1992, we had about 130,000 dairy farmers in the United States. Today, we have about 29,000 in the United States. Of those 29,000, 500 of them produce 34% of the milk
My
that's made in the
gosh,
United States.
the industry's been decimated.
Yeah, the industry. So government has done that. They've, ethanol. Everybody talks about ethanol as being this great thing. Understand, ethanol wouldn't be here without government mandates. If they didn't tell you you had to have it in gasoline, I'm not saying ethanol is bad. I don't buy into the whole thing. It's going to ruin your car and all that. But as a market force, it has, it wouldn't have been available without government saying you must use it. So
Mhm.
so that's how government's gotten involved in agriculture. In the last few years with the dairy industry, they've come forward and have said, yeah, we so like with the ethanol, they got in there, they said ethanol price of corn has shot up. Now it was artificially low, so
Mhm.
government made a problem and then government made a solution.
Mhm.
Neither one of them, if government had just stayed out of the way, neither one of them would have been an issue.
Right.
So they came forward and they said, oh, well, everything is out of whack, feed costs are too high, so we're going to start sending dairy farmers a check, and it's going to be based on this formula. They don't even get the formula right because they don't have enough money, and so they got to find a way to cheapen it up for themselves. And so over the last 3-4 years, started just before the pandemic, and then it's expanded, of course. They're just sending dairy farmers a check every
Hmm.
month, and it varies. You never know what it's going to be. They've got a formula and whatnot. So last month, a lot of my friends that are still commercial dairymen, they said about a third of their income came straight to them in a form of a direct deposit from Farm Service Agency.
Wow.
Um, Now, before everybody beats up on the farmer, understand that makes your cost of milk at the store 50% less,
Hmm.
because otherwise the farmer has to get that money from somewhere. We're still a
Yeah.
business, and they still have to have income that covers their expenses. So so it while the farmer's cashing the check, everybody down the line is gaining benefit as well.
Hmm. Gotcha.
So don't think it's just
So that's the
those three.
pressure of why they feel like I've got to take this, because if you don't, then what do you do? And that's what
Right. Well,
you're.
if you produce something at 30% under cost and sell it, how long do you produce that? At
Hmm.
some point in time, you don't have any equity left. You can't go to the bank and borrow any money, and with the hope of a brighter day down the road,
Hmm.
you're done. And we have seen that, for just when you look at my career, from 130,000 dairy farmers to less than 30,000.
Hmm.
Uh, when I started, the average farm had about 60 cows on it. Now the average farm has about 380 cows on it.
My
So
gosh.
so it's the tentacles of the government, and the solutions that they provide are, always half measures. They're never good enough. So that's a very brief, and it's not exhaustive. And if there's other farmers listening, they're going to go, "Oh, you forgot this and forgot that." And I'm like,
Hmm.
yeah, we aren't going into it. This isn't a
It's not a deep
700
dive.
level course. Uh, but I have always felt I've always felt bad about taking subsidies. So I'm gonna be honest with you. Yeah, I've taken a lot of farm subsidies over the years. Um, just had to be
Hmm.
real honest with you, or felt like I had to. And about a couple of years ago, I met this guy Jared Sparks, and then he told me about these guys down in Springfield at Hope Baptist Church, and I get down there for Christendom 2.0 conference, and
Hmm.
I'm listening to these guys that are talking about medical mandates, and they're talking about all these things, and how we need to reclaim things for Christ. And I'm on this move from this, um, I won't say pre-mill in the classical term, because I never was 100% pre-mill, because I could never make all the dots connect. But
Hmm.
those are the types of churches I grew up in. But I'm on this move, and I'm like reading all this stuff, and I'm going like, oh yeah, that makes sense. This makes sense. and I'm getting into this post-mill theology. And the thing that keeps just beating down on me is Psalms 110, verse 1. Yeah, sit at my right hand while I make your enemies my footstool. And I
Mm-hmm.
really delved into what was the enemies of Christ. And I was looking at it for me, because I'm like, I was once the enemy of Christ. Through his
Mm-hmm.
grace, I've been saved and brought forth that. But I was like, but I always have to bring uh myself into submission, because
Mm-hmm.
there's still times that enemy rises up in me. And one of the things that just beat me up was, who are you dependent on
Mm-hmm.
in my farming career? Who are you dependent on? Who are you dependent on? And I was dependent on the bank, and I was dependent on the government. And I was, and I mean, I'd sit in front of the bank every year for my operating loan, and I'd pray in the office, or, in the parking lot, my pickup, Lord, I need this operating note. Give me this operating. And I walk in and I get this operating note. And then I'd have a burden for a year of how am I going to pay this back? I just borrowed all this money. And I kept thinking, why is, in all honesty, why is God's blessing a burden?
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
know, and I was like, and I would go to the FSA office, and I'd sign up for the year's programs and tell them what I planted, tell them what I got for yield, and I'd get my crop insurance stuff all in line. I did all that stuff, and I kept thinking to myself, why is this blessing such a burden? And I'm a little thick-headed, So finally, about after COVID, God goes, maybe it's because everything you're calling blessing isn't,
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, oh, wait, but everybody does this. I never wore the mask, but I understood everybody saying, walking around going, well, everybody wears the mask.
Mm-hmm.
And it just was like this, I don't know, this light bulb, or whatever you want to call it. And I was like, okay, God's blessings aren't a burden. So
Mm-hmm.
everything that I am calling a blessing it's burning me. It gets back to, that's probably the enemy of God.
Mm-hmm.
And it got to me where I was thinking, okay, an enemy of God is somebody who depends on somebody else. Jeremiah, I think it's 17:5, 17:9, something like that. It says, you know, uh, brings forward, I don't have the verse in front of me, and I apologize, but it's those who trust in man and man's right arm, you know, are the enemies of God, basically. And I kept thinking, everything I do in agriculture depends on some guy, some bureaucrat, some dairy co-op employee that's, has no information or desire to make my life better, just to keep their job.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, that's all the people I depend on.
Mm-hmm.
So last summer, we're just going through some things, and I'm like, God, I need to come up with some other way. And then in the fall of last fall, um, every year or every 3 years, your dairy co-op comes out and has for the last 20 years. They come around with this survey that you have to fill out if you're going to keep selling milk to them, and it's called the FARM program. It stands for Farmers Assuring Responsible Management. Nobody cares about this. When you go buy your gallon of milk, they tell you all the customers want this. You go to ask some farmer or some average consumer, and they're going like, I just care for
But
milk on the shelf. I
yeah,
don't care.
right,
So
right.
they're asking me all these questions, and questions are like, how many gallons of diesel fuel do you use a year? How many shots do you give your cows? Antibiotics, vaccines, all this stuff. And I'm going, I don't understand why I have to answer any of these questions.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this auditor is sitting there, and now they're going like, hey, anytime a third party auditor can come on your farm. And I'm talking to the guy, and I said, I says, this is all God's here. I literally said this to him. This guy he's just like mouth open, agape. I go, if God wants me to keep this dairy farm, I'm going to keep this dairy farm. If God doesn't want me to keep this dairy farm, I'm going to lose this dairy farm. I says, I produce milk on two basic principles. Now, I'd never said this to anybody else before in my life.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, where's this coming from? I says, I produce milk because I love my God, and I use my gifts that he gave me
Mm-hmm.
to produce milk. And I says, and I produce quality milk because I love my neighbor. And all of a sudden I'm like, well, those are the two greatest
Yeah,
commandments
that's great.
in the Bible. And he's sitting here and he's just like,
Okay.
I never heard anybody, what's God got to do with milking cows? You know, he's just flabbergasted. And I start going through all this stuff. And I said, this is just government intrusion. And I finally, I looked at him and I says, this is a voluntary program, right? He goes, yeah, this is voluntary. I said, well, okay, I'm not doing it. I'm not
That's
not
awesome.
doing it. And he goes, well, if it's voluntary, but if you don't do it, you can't sell milk to us. And I was like, you have a different definition of voluntary than I do.
Yeah, no kidding.
And I said to him, I said, you know what? That's fine. He says, well, you have till January 1st to make up your mind. This was in October. And I says, well, I don't think my mind's going to change between me and now and January 1st. We have that discussion. And then that night I have to tell my wife,
Yeah.
oh, by the way, we just lost our milk market and I don't know how we're going to pay all the bills. And so that was in October, and things kind of came to a head in the end of November. They wouldn't pick up my milk anymore. I wouldn't sign. I would keep completing steps. So we were milking 70 cows at the time, selling about 4,000 pounds of milk a day. We sell milk by the pound, not by the gallon, off the farm. So that's about 500, roughly 500 gallons of milk a day. I got no place to go with. Got mortgage and bills, so we started selling some cows, paying some bills down. I went to town. I actually started working with my son at the electricians. I used to work a lot of construction, so it was kind of easy for me to walk into. And we were just like, okay, God, this is up to you. And we floundered. I mean, we did. We just were like, I don't know what to do. I don't still milking cows, running all the milk down the tank. I'm barely making my payments. I'm just, just barely keeping alive. And we get to April, and God gives me a verse through my son out in Kansas, who was a welder. He says, I just saw this verse on a co-op's trucks. And I looked it up, and he says, you should read. Now, I've read this verse before, but you know how it is. It's just, there's verses, and then there's like these filler verses in between the verses, and you just never pay attention to them. But it's 2 Corinthians 9:10. It says, now may he who supplies seed to the sower and bread for food supply and multiply the seed you have sown and increase the fruits of your righteousness. That's 2 Corinthians 9:10. And I just grabbed a hold of that verse, and I says, God's going to provide. And I says, this is what I want to do. I just wanted to be dependent upon God. Don't want to be dependent upon man. And so I'm all excited. I'm pumped. We're getting this plan together. We've got a good Christian brother who's been in this direct marketing of agriculture. We've tapped into him, hired him as a consultant, and we're getting a plan together. We've got a mission statement. We've got the sales goals. I mean, we're making labels. Hey, this is how we're going to sell our milk. And we're, getting ready to make a website. We're getting all this stuff together. So this is just after the last conference down there in Springfield. And I feel pumped after that. I'm just encouraged. And we're moving forward, and we've got a date of May 30th. We're going to start selling milk to the public. First weekend of May, we go out to see my son Jared and our daughter-in-law Grace, and the grandbaby Mabel, and waiting for the second daughter. We're talking about all this stuff on the way home that Saturday, May 6th, and driving down Highway 36. Really just excited. Here's my wife and I. We've been married for almost 30 years, and we got this like new pep. We got this new idea. And my two boys were at home taking care of the cattle and all the stuff that needed. My oldest son, Jeff, and my youngest son, Jordan. And Jeff calls me and he says, hey, we're under a tornado watch. And I go, oh, well, hey, have a good time.
Yeah, right. No big deal. Whatever.
We've been there through. And we're driving, and we're about an hour and a half away from home. And the road is just, the highway that we're on is just 6 miles south of our home. And I'm looking off to the east, and I'm going, man, that's a big cloud up there. We could see it. And it's about 8:30 at night. My boys call me up. My son Jeff, he calls me up. He goes, "Hey, we're headed to the basement. This is bad." I go, "Oh, well, pretty windy probably."
Mm-hmm.
We get home about 10 o'clock, and 7 of our 9 buildings are laying on themselves and scattered across 40 acres. Our house is still standing, but the windows are broke out on the west side. The siding is off the house on 3 sides. Somehow the roof stayed on. Um, the only building that is like nearly completely intact is our milking parlor, where we actually milk the cows. But
Mm-hmm.
all the other buildings are pushed up against it. Now I'm only milking 10 cows at the time, so you know we've gone from milking 70 down to 10. Um, but all the buildings are laying against the opening to get in there and milk where we milk our cows, get the cows into the building. It took
Mm-hmm.
us 3 days with 2 skid loaders and a mini excavator to move all the buildings so that we could get the cows in to milk them.
Wow.
Of course, we lost all our power, the main poles. We lost our skid loader. We lost our tractor. We lost all our hay equipment. My pickup, the boys were like, "Oh, it looks like it's going to hail." So they pulled all of our pickups into one of the machinery sheds because we don't have a garage. And then that building fell on all of our pickups,
Oh my gosh.
and just it just was, I'll be real honest, I'm not a real emotional guy. But the next morning, my wife and I are out, we're looking at the barn, and I said, I'm just weeping. I go,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like,
Brutal.
I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And my wife says to me, "Why did God allow this to happen?" And something had happened to me a few years ago where God said, "Stop blaming
Mm-hmm.
this." And everybody, all the neighbors, we feel like Job. And I was almost angry, indignant about this. I was like, this is all that stuff that happened to Job happened to Job. The
Mm-hmm.
neighbors didn't get hit by the whirlwind. They didn't come and steal, the marauding people didn't come and steal the neighbors' camels. It was all that stuff. The neighbors didn't lose their 10 children. All
Mm-hmm.
that stuff happened to Job. This is just part of a fallen world. I can remember saying to my neighbor, "This is just us living in a fallen world. Don't blame God for this."
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "That's what everybody's doing here is blaming God." I said, "That's wrong. That's blasphemous to God. God didn't do this. Yes, he could have stopped it, but this is just the natural consequences of living in a fallen world." And and yet at the same time, I'm broken. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
"God, I'm out here walking this path. I think I'm doing the right thing. I don't know what else can happen. I don't know what else I can do. We're just getting ready to plant crops here. All my tractors are destroyed." And then, God he works it out.
Mm-hmm.
And it hasn't been easy. We haven't had enough money. There's been no golden angels flying along, keeping my
Mm-hmm.
spirits lifted or anything. I mean, it just has been what it's been. But
Yeah.
we're what, 5 months past that, and my youngest son, and I were talking this weekend. We cleaned up a bunch more. I mean, we still got buildings laying in piles that we're still cleaning up, but we're
Wow.
pretty close to having them all cleaned up. And I said to him, I said, when you think about it, 5 months ago, did you really think we could be here?
Mm-hmm.
"Oh, Dad, I did." I said, "Well,
Wow.
that's just us staying at
Mm-hmm.
it."
Yeah.
There, we had great help from our church for about 3 days, and everybody's got a life. They
Mm-hmm.
can't be here all the time doing stuff, and God's been faithful. He hasn't made it easy though,
Yeah.
and
Right.
and he hasn't, and there's been enough, but there hasn't been any extra, and we're getting through it. So we're kind of enjoying that, and still wondering, I mean, there's always that little thing in the back of your mind going, I guess that's what I've learned about faith is it's not about the circumstances, and it's not
Mm-hmm.
about what I see. It's that even in the moments that I don't see it, God's still
Yeah.
doing something, and he's still working, and we're still moving forward. And
Yeah.
so we held off for a couple months, but when we started direct selling our milk in July to consumers, and we're working really hard to make that happen. And that's
Mm-hmm.
been, that's so I went from making a commodity to making a food product now.
Yeah.
So
Right.
all
Right.
I did was I made the milk, put it on a truck, and it left. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
care.
Now
And
you're
now,
making milk and selling milk.
Yep.
And so you do a subscription service basically where people will subscribe and you deliver it. Is that right?
Mhm. Yeah, we have a website. It's nourishingfamilyfarm.com. And of course, milk is not you don't sell it to people in, New York State or, you're depending on your local
Yeah,
community.
it's got to be all local, right?
Yeah. So we sell raw milk. It's unpasteurized, perfectly healthy. Okay. If you don't believe it's perfectly healthy, that's fine. But just understand you believe
Just
the lie of the government.
Yeah, just read a little bit. It takes you
Yeah.
about 30 minutes to figure out, wait a minute, the government's pulling a fast one on us again.
Yeah. And then we also sell cream that we separate here on the farm for your coffee, for making whipped cream or butter if you want to make it. We do sell butter and cheese curds as well. So it's basically my wife and I, and she does the milk deliveries, goes to different towns on different days of the week and drops off. People come to see her, and we sell our milk there. And so again, but people, it is expensive. I gladly tell people that. Yeah, it seems like it's expensive. It's $12.50 a gallon. I said, but I don't take any government subsidies. I'm not getting. I'm the most honest person or one of the most honest people in the dairy industry. This is what it costs. You go, and you're being honest and saying I'm paying the full freight on the food that I provide for my family. And so so I went from being a commodity producer to a food producer, and that has been, I mean, I'm 51 and I feel like I've learned more in the last year than I have in the first 50.
Yeah.
It's just,
yeah.
I just like, wow.
Well, I love the story. I think it will resonate with people as they hear this, because we're wanting to do things in a way that honors the Lord the most. And these incentives that the government give, I mean, they're everywhere, where if you just, maybe it's just the way you've always lived, and maybe, your situation might be a little bit different, but if there's something that just kind of just gnaws at you, why is this the way it is? This has cost you a lot to make this transition, and yet you did it out of principle, out of a desire to honor the Lord and depend on Him. And it's not like I said to begin at the beginning, it's not like everything has been perfect since you made this decision. There's been challenges along the way, but I think when you've made decisions like you've made, you probably can sleep well at night knowing we're doing what we're doing because we want to honor the Lord. And Christy's been right on board with this, it seems like, and the milk and the cheese and all that, we've had it all. It's great. Seeing you guys come through, and you finally made it after the tire or the breakdown, after your starter went out or whatever, but we finally got to spend some time with you, and we really enjoyed the milk, really enjoyed the cheese. It was great. So
that's one of the neat things about what we've done is it's brought us together as a couple.
Yeah,
this is
awesome.
This is her and I's passion. Now, she your wife will always sit there and go, how do we pay all the bills?
Right, because I'm looking at this.
Yeah,
we're trusting the Lord, honey.
yeah. And she's like, well, I have to market the milk and I have to sell the milk, because that's how, because I'm still working full time in town. And she's like, how do I do? And I feel such a weight, and for me, that's something I have to take off her. But she's doing a phenomenal job. I mean,
awesome.
This is this is what God, that home economy. There's that Instagram farm. This everything's picture perfect. Yeah, nothing's picture perfect here. We have lots of problems. Oh, you spilled the milk, and now you really cry because you spilled the milk.
Yeah,
can't put it back in the jug.
It sounds like you're still in the same spot, though. If God wants us to keep this, then we will. And if He has other plans for us, then we follow those plans. But what a great place to be, even though it can be difficult, is you're just, literally in a place of dependency and trust in the Lord. And, I love what you're doing. I think it's an incredible thing. And so let's switch again, and we'll kind of switch gears and kind of bring things to a close here, because I love the content, but you're actually working on something, because you've got a lot to offer when it comes to just what you've experienced over the last 20-30 years, and knowing the industry. And our good buddy Ian's got so many good things to say as well about farming, and he he does this not in the scale that you do, but he does kind of a smaller family farm kind of thing, and knows some of the ins and outs of all this kind of thing as well. And you guys have actually been working together and talking about possibly doing a podcast together. So I'd love to hear about that. And I know a little bit of details, but I think there's probably more that I've not heard yet. And for those folks that are listening and thinking, man, this is interesting, tell us about what you got going on, what you guys are thinking through, and where they could find it.
Well, Ian Garris and Jonathan Augustine are two guys that we met down there at Hope, and they both have varied backgrounds as I do, but we're all really into agriculture and want to see the kingdom of God move forward and good food produced for God's good people. And we look at agriculture, and the three of us kind of come from this different perspectives, and we look at agriculture, we go, there's things wrong with agriculture that need Christian influence to change them. And so as we've talked and we've been talking about this for about 6 months now. Hey, nobody in this space, John Moody does a wonderful job, good Christian brother. Joel Salatin, another good Christian brother, but they're niche, and they're not talking about, and because they don't have time, it's no slam on them, but they're not talking about the overarching principles. And so we started talking about this thing, and then we coined the phrase reformed agrarianism.
Yeah,
and
I like that.
So we said, what are we going to do? And then, those guys down at Hope, it's bless it, baptize it, or damn it type things. And so we're looking at these things and saying, what in agriculture can we bless? What do we need to take that's a good idea, but not done for the right reasons, and baptize it? And then what do we have to tell people? This needs to be thrown off and damned to hell because it's just wrong. And so out of that, and out of this, the three of us had this kind of text group going and talking about stuff. One day goes, Ian says, nobody's talking about this in the public square. We should start to do that. And so we were like, well, how do we do this? And blog back and forth. And then went down there in April and sat down. We had a little meeting after the conference there, and we kind of landed on this idea. Well, maybe we should do a podcast. Okay. And then I had a tornado, and I was like, yeah, I'm out. and everybody else is like, yeah, this is getting crazy. John's moving, and so we've been held off a little ways. And we're hoping here in the early part of winter that we're going to get together and get this started, because we feel like it's something that needs to be brought forward.
Yeah.
So that the consumer can understand, buy good food. And why you need,
seriously. It's critical.
Yeah. Who are you going to depend on? Because if COVID didn't teach you anything, it should have taught you that they're going to control your life. So how are you going to move outside of that? We have all these discussions about parallel economy, and I never hear anybody talk about food production. It's yeah, we got to have this cottage industry, whether it's metalworking, welding, electrician, your local mechanic, a midwife. I hear all that stuff, and I go, but if you still depend on them for food, you're ultimately dependent. That's how Gideon, he was called a mighty man of valor when he just stopped taking the food from the Midianites. That was when he was called. He said, I'm going to take responsibility for my family. And so that's what we want to do with this podcast, is kind of bring forward that. So it's not just how to milk a cow and how to raise a pig and why you should want to do those things, but also who are you dependent on?
Yeah, that's really good. I mean, when it comes to food, and I know these guys have had these conversations as well, but from seed oils all the way up to everything that's being handed to us, and you get given the stamp of approval by the government, they're making us fat, sick, and then medicating us after that. And it's this whole thing that's connected together, that just pre-government interference and COVID stuff, 2019, that I would have been like, I don't know about all that. Where now, things all come together and the 3D picture is made clear, and you realize, wait a minute, they're literally doing this to us. The food production is killing us. It is making us sick. It is making us fat. And so it's critical. And so I hope you guys do it. I hope you guys get this thing going, get the ball rolling. I'll be the first listener, reviewer. Hey, great podcast, great show. I can't wait. So
Yep.
please, get that thing going and light a fire under those guys. And,
Mhm.
down there in Hope, it's not like they need a fire lit under them, and they're always doing something,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
man, it's good stuff. Well, guys, this has been a lot of fun. I hope you've enjoyed it. JR, it's been great. I really appreciate your time. And I know you're going right after this and you're going to milk some cows. And
Yep.
if you're in that Missouri area and you're listening in and you're in the radius of delivery, make sure and sign up and get some milk from their farm. And tell us again the website, and I'll put that in the show notes.
NourishingFamilyFarm.com.
Awesome.
Yep.
All right. Well, thanks so much, JR. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hey, thanks, Jared. Appreciate all your work and great podcast. I've just enjoyed it.
Well,
Yep.
thank you very much, man. Appreciate it.